Good morning, everybody. We want to give a very special welcome to our Shoreline South campus and also our Shoreline West campus. We love you guys. My smoking hot wife is down south, and love you, Laura, and love all of you guys down south and also west. And again, our online audience, we're just so glad to welcome you as well. Let's all of us stand to our feet, and we're going to do our Shoreline Creed together here this morning. And while you're standing, and before I do the creed today, I thought I'd tell you this joke that I heard. And I want to warn you, right up front, I heard it from another pastor who tried it on his congregation last weekend. But he told me this joke, and I thought it was really funny. I've been laughing about it, actually, all week, just thinking about it. But there was a pirate, and he was cruising in the Caribbean, and he was looking for some enemies to fight when one of his sailors up in the crow's nest of the boat saw an enemy that was larger than their ship was off on the horizon, and sent word down to the captain. And the captain called his valet and said, valet, I want you to bring my red shirt. Bring my red shirt, because if I get injured in the battle, I don't want any of the other sailors to even know that I've been injured, and so the blood will match the red shirt. So bring me my red shirt. And then after he had sent the valet off for the red shirt, the sailor in the crow's nest called down and said, there are 10 enemy ships on the other side. And so the pirate lifted up his spyglass and saw those enemy ships, and called his valet again to him. And he said to the valet, bring me my brown pants. I don't know. I just thought that was funny. That was really funny. If you didn't get it, you'll laugh about it, Tuesday or Wednesday. All right. So you guys ready? Let's recite our Shoreline Creed together. I'm sorry. All right. How can we get back on track? Ready? I am loved by God. I cannot earn it. I cannot lose it. I am made brand new. I live with passion and purpose. I am empowered by the Spirit to be the church in the world and to live this love revolution. Let's give God praise for that. And you may be seated. So growing up, I loved this particular board game called Risk. Have you ever seen this game? Have you ever played this game? So we would play it together as a family, and my dad, who supported me, and my mom, who nurtured me, and my brothers and my sister, who did life together with me. We would sit around a kitchen table, and we would play Risk. And I loved dominating my family. And when my armies would cannibalize their armies, and my armies became the world-dominating force on the board, there was an intoxicating pleasure to that I cannot describe to you. I would crush them. Militarily and psychologically, I would ground them into the dust. But there's something that I learned about that game called Risk, is that when the game was over, all the pieces went back into the box. Now, I didn't want them to. No, I wanted them to leave the board on the kitchen table for weeks to come, so that anybody who even visited the house would ask, whose armies were those? And of course, the tale would be told about my world-dominating force. But the truth is when the game is over, all the pieces go back into the box. Life can be a little bit like that, can't it? We want to conquer. We want to win. We want to succeed. And there's nothing wrong with winning and succeeding. The problem is, and the danger is, that we don't realize that at the end, it all goes back in the box. When you don't realize that, when that's not a part of your thinking, then you lose sight of what's really most important. And when you lose sight of what's most important, here's what happens. The game becomes what's most important. And you live your life for the game. The game becomes the all-consuming passion in your life. And your schedule gets pretty frantic, and your relationships get pretty shallow, and you're filled with mindless activities because you're just busy playing the game. And when the game becomes the most important thing, then the most important question is, am I winning? And if that becomes the most important question, then the next most important question is, what is the score? What is the score? Most people live with that being the most important question in their life. What is the score? Now, there's nothing wrong with having a score. It would be pretty boring going down to a football game and them not keeping score. Or watching a basketball game or watching a baseball game and they didn't have a score. So there's nothing inherently wrong with there being a score. The problem is when the score becomes what is our chief preoccupation. The problem comes in when the score is our identity. It's what we're living for. It's what we're dreaming about. It's the only thing that really matters. It becomes our identity. And I think if we're really honest, we would all agree that by nature, we are scorekeepers, aren't we? I know for me, I grew up keeping score. Started pretty early. I remember the time when I was the fastest shuttle run runner in my elementary school class. I mean, there were other people who were quicker on the 50-yard dash, but there was nobody who could do the shuttle run faster than I could. I was number one. I was keeping score. And I still remember that feeling of euphoria. I was the best. So when did that happen? I don't know, somewhere in my childhood. September the 16th, 1968. And then I also remember when I was picked number one. I was the number one draft pick as a 9-year-old in my city Little League Baseball Association. Number one. And then, I was going through school, and then I graduated, and there was another list, and I discovered that I was a part of the list that made the upper half possible. I graduated in the part of the class academically that made the upper half possible. That was a stupid list. I don't know what people were counting on there. And you know what? Just a couple of weeks ago, we had the Caleb run, and I was number 9 in my age category. I was number 9. There were only number 10 people running in my age category. But we grow up counting, don't we? We like to keep score. We were at a pastor's conference. This was years ago, and Luke was talking to one of the other pastors. We had taken our family with us, and Luke was talking to one of the other pastors, and he asked the pastor how many seats he had in his auditorium. And the pastor said, well, we have 4,000 seats in our auditorium. And Luke, popped right up and said, we've got 5,000. He was counting. And in this whole idea of counting, I'm embarrassed to tell you the story. I think I've already shared it once, but it's a true story. I was at a pastor's conference, and one of the pastors, we were in a small little group. There was 3 or 4 of us together, and one of them asked the question, well, how's your church going? And that's really, in pastor speak, that's a question that kind of gets translated this way. How big is your church? That's pastor speak for that. And then, the really hidden implication behind that is, how important are you? Okay, because we're in this group, we don't know each other, so people are trying to figure out, how big is your church? Therefore, how important are you? And our church was, just 200 folks at the time. And we're in this group, and one of the guys said, well, we have 1,000 people in our church. The other guy had 1,500 people in his church. The other guy had, 1,700 people in his church. And then the conversation came to me. And 200 sounded so small. And so in the back of my mind, I'm just wondering to myself, can I just add 100? Because 300 sounds a lot better than 200. And I'm having this argument in the back of my mind, and there's one voice that says, go for it. 300 does sound better than 200. And then there's another voice that says, come on, you don't even know these people. You'll probably never even see these people again. Are you going to compromise your integrity for 100 people? Come on. So what did you do? I said, we had 500. I don't know why I did it. I just did. We keep score, don't we? And I'm not the only person that keeps score. As a society, we're keeping score. The poker player wants to know where he stands, right? So he counts his chips. The businessman, wants to know where the business rates. Are we in the Fortune 500? There's a list of companies, the 500 biggest companies in our land, that people want to know where they stand. People, kind of keep score by checking how much money they have in their bank accounts. People keep score trying to figure out how big their office is. People keep score, by dressing a certain way. I mean, there's scores everywhere. People want to know, what is the top movie? What is the best seller? We have a radio station on our dial, the top 20. What are the most popular songs that are playing in the country right now? Everybody's keeping score. And scorekeeping isn't just something that happens in our society or in our own lives. It's actually something that's happened in the Bible as well. You've got Cain and Abel. It's as old as that. You've got Cain, who is realizing that Abel's offering is better than his. He's keeping score. He's watching. And because he was on the losing side of that equation, it produced emotions that led to rage, that led to murder. There was a couple of gals that were married to the same guy in the Old Testament, Jacob. He had 2 wives, and they were competing against each other, Rachel and Leah. And Rachel was beautiful, and Leah wasn't quite so pretty, but Leah had the upper score on the kids. She had 3. Rachel had 0. So then Rachel gave her maid to Jacob and said, come on, let's bring some kids into our side of the family. And then the race began to unfold, and they were counting, keeping score. They eventually ended up with 6 apiece, 12 kids. And then out of those 12 kids, one of them's name was Joseph. And he was the one the father really loved, and it ticked off the other 11. Why? Because they were keeping score. Fast forward a couple of generations, and you've got King David, and you got Saul, and this is what they said about Saul. He's got thousands, and David's got tens of thousands. So this idea of keeping score is as old as the Bible itself. And into this score-keeping world, God has some wisdom. Because here's the reality. When we keep score, if we're ahead, man, we're feeling some joy, don't we? If we're tied, we're feeling some anxiety. But if we're on the losing side of that comparison, then, man, there's all kinds of emotions that start building in our hearts. And so into this kind of world of counting, of keeping score, Jesus gives us this little parable. In Luke chapter 12 and verse 16. And Jesus told them this parable. There once was a rich man who had land which bore good crops. And he began to think to himself, I don't have a place to keep all of my crops. What can I do? This is what I will do. He told himself, I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and where I will store the grain and all my other goods. Then I will say to myself, lucky man, you have all these good things you need for many years. Take life easy, drink and enjoy yourself. But then God said to him, you fool, this very night you will have to give up your life. And then who will get all of these things you have kept for yourself? Here's a story that Jesus told about somebody who is all about counting. And isn't it interesting that the word that God uses to describe this particular person is fool? He doesn't say necessarily that he's a wicked man. He just says he's a fool. I wonder if this guy really never intended to end up where he actually ended up. I wonder if this rich man, just kind of went with the flow of culture, just went with the current of everyone else. Maybe he never intended to become a greedy person. Maybe he never intended to make his life all about himself. Maybe he never intended, to have, children, that didn't know his name. Maybe he didn't intend that his health would be compromised in the pursuit of all the things he was trying to accomplish. Maybe he was just never confronted. Maybe he was just never challenged. Maybe he was never inspired to live a different kind of life. Maybe he just went with the flow, went with the current, went with the culture, and this is where he ended up. Jesus didn't call him wicked. He said he was foolish. And I wonder how many of us can get all wrapped up in the score, get all wrapped up in defining our identity by the things our culture values. Here was a man that had a scorecard. Sow some seed and reap an amazing harvest. Check. Build bigger barns. Check. Eat, check. Drink, check. Be merry, check. Don't die. Oops. Because that's the tricky part, isn't it? This part about dying. We look at a calendar, and it has boxes on it. And if you're anything like, our family, Laura was actually hounding me yesterday. She was saying, you know what, we got to sit down and look at the calendar. Rob, you got to understand, we got lots of things coming up, man. There's all kinds of activities. And she's got this pink calendar. And it's got stuff in it all the time. I mean, months out, man, appointments and things and projects and so on. And every once in a while, we sit down and we look at this calendar, and one box leads to another box. We've got today is in a box. August the 14th, 2000 and what year are we? 11. And we got this box. And we got another box tomorrow. And we got another box on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. We got these boxes. And for most of us, we've been having these boxes in our lives for so long that we take for granted that tomorrow's box is going to be available to us. That today will actually become tomorrow. But the truth is that for none of us, we just can't guarantee that today is going to lead to tomorrow. And here's the story of this guy that was all about planning for his tomorrows and keeping score and racking up all of these assets. But the reality is that he wasn't planning for the reality that at the end, it all goes back in the box. It all goes back in the box for all of us. And some people, they hate that reality. Let me read to you a verse from Ecclesiastes, and this is Solomon. He was tormented by that idea. He said, listen to this. I hate all the things that I've toiled for under the sun because I must leave them to somebody who comes after me. He hated it. He was tormented by it. And here's what Jesus says. He ends this particular parable with an unmistakable message. He says, this is how it will be for those who store up things for themselves, but are not rich toward God. Those whose whole identity is wrapped up in the score. Those whose whole identity is wrapped up in where they rate. However you want to define that. Some people do it educationally. Some people do it materialistically. Some people do it, in terms of notoriety. And, there's all kinds of different ways that people keep score. And however you do that, wherever you find your identity, Jesus is challenging you and saying, you know what? Whatever you find your identity in today is going to seem really, really foolish when all the stuff goes back into the box. If your identity is not found in something more significant than that, it's going to be, and here's the operative word he uses, it's going to be really foolish for you on that day. And so I'm committed as your pastor to just telling you the truth that at different appropriate times in your life, you need to be reminded that it all goes back in the box. And how are you living today in light of that truth? How does that challenge you to live today? Jesus said the answer is to be rich towards Him. Be rich towards God. There's nothing wrong with being rich. Just be rich towards God. And in our identity there, discovering our richness towards God will preserve our lives in a way that really makes sense. So the way we live today and the way we live tomorrow and the way we live on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, if it was to be that this week would be the last week of our lives, we would have nothing to be afraid of. We would have no concerns whatsoever because we've been living with the reality that our identity is not in the score. So then the most important question becomes to us, how can we be rich towards God? And I think there's a lot of answers to that particular question. I think we can be rich towards God by celebrating the beauty of God's grace, recognizing all the wonderful things that He's done for us, celebrating the fact that we are forgiven by grace, that we have a brand new identity by grace, that He lives inside of us by grace, celebrating the beauty of all that God has done for us. That is being rich towards God. I think, we can be rich towards God when we say to our hearts, you know what? We want to be about worship. We want to be about glorifying the name of God. Then we become rich towards God. I think when we prioritize our lives and spend time with our families and nurture our relationships, I think that's being rich towards God. When we purpose in our lives that we're going to live every day to the fullest with joy and excitement, and we're going to live every single day putting one foot in front of the other and becoming fully alive and fully aware in each moment that we are rich towards God. But for the purposes of this message, I'm going to sum it up this way. I think that we become rich towards God, and here's my challenge for all of us today. It's wrapped up in this thought. We become rich towards God when we take what is temporal in our lives and use it to serve the eternal. I think we really become rich towards God when we take what is temporal in our lives and we use it to serve the eternal. And I want to remind you here this morning on what is temporal and what is eternal. What is temporal and what is eternal? Okay, we got a computer. Temporary or eternal? Temporary, isn't it? We got some luggage. Well, that's to symbolize vacations and traveling the world. Temporary or eternal? Temporary. Clothes, Laura, she's not here. Temporary or eternal? Cars, temporary or eternal? I mean, this has a license plate. Is that Elohim? Like, isn't that the name of God? Even if you put that on the license plate, still temporary, huh? And what about a motorcycle? Temporary or eternal? No, that's eternal. No, it's not. I'd like it to be, but it's not. It's temporary. What are the eternal things? What are the eternal things? Temporary or eternal? 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 The reality is that there are only two types of stuff in the world. Temporary stuff and eternal stuff. I was in New York City, and you guys can go. Thanks, you guys. I was in New York City this past week, and I was standing in the middle of Times Square, And I saw all the bright lights. If you've ever been to Times Square, if you've ever seen it on TV, there are these gigantic, like marquee type billboards, and they're all brightly lit. And there was one place you could stand right there where 42nd Street and Broadway and 7th Avenue, they all kind of converge together. And there's this gigantic screen. And if you're standing there, you can see they have this video camera. You can see yourself on the screen, and everybody's there waving at the screens. And you got all these gigantic, larger than life, I mean like 15, 20-story billboards advertising movies and different products. And Laura and I were standing right there in Times Square. The kids had already gone back to the hotel, and we're just standing there. And I had this feeling, I had this sense that this is eternal. And I knew it wasn't, but I was feeling like it was. The buildings and the advertising and all this stuff, it just made me feel so small. And it actually made me feel like Christianity was small. That somehow, being here in Austin in this church, God seems big to me. But there in that central location with all the finance and all the buildings and all these man-made monuments, it was harder for me to really understand what was eternal and what was temporary. I was standing there and I was just feeling a little bit overwhelmed. And then I just began to meditate and think, really, there's only two things in life. Stuff that lasts and stuff that doesn't. And I left that particular Times Square and I walked into a store, and Laura was just looking at some costume jewelry, and there was a lady who was, kind of standing there who was a salesperson, and I had this overwhelming sense, this gal is eternal. Everything else in the store temporary, but that gal was eternal. And so I just started engaging her in a conversation. We started to talk, and as it turns out, she had just recently moved to New York, and then, we were talking a little bit about God, and that kind of worked itself into the conversation, and then about church, and she said, I've been looking for a church, and we had just been at a church, just a few days before. We had attended a church in New York City, a life-giving, amazing church, and so I was able to direct her, and we were, encouraging. We said, listen, and, if you're busy and you can't even get to church, you can watch us online, and so if you're watching, I'm preaching about you. But here's the deal. Everybody that was standing in Times Square, all of those people that seemed to be overwhelming to me in that moment, they are what lasts for eternity. Everything else goes back into the box. So my question to you today is, are you living as if the game means everything? Is the most important thing in your life the game? And then, therefore, the most important question is, are you winning? And then the most important question after that is, what's the score? Is that the way you're really living? Or are you living with the reality that it all goes back into the box? And I want what I do, I want how I use my time, and I want my assets. I want what goes back into the box to serve that which doesn't. I don't want to love things and use people. I want to use things and love people. I want to make sure that if my life ended, I was about the right kinds of stuff. There's an old Jewish proverb that says, get right with God on the last day. And then the question is, well, when's the last day? Nobody knows. So why don't you live today as if it's the last day? And isn't that kind of what Tim McGraw discovered in his song, Live Like You Were Dying? There's a song out there, popular country song. All the things that you would do if you knew that you were going to die. Well, live that way. Now, of course, it's saying to ride a bull and do all this kind of stuff. But I'm saying, if you know that at some point in time, there is a point in time when this life will be over, don't you want to be about doing stuff that really matters? I think this is what I really discovered in Times Square. I think this is what was really kind of messing with my mind, was the thousands of people that we saw were clueless to the whole idea of temporary and eternal. I mean, the vast majority. But here I was, just Laura and I, standing in the crowd, and we know that there is temporary stuff and there is eternal stuff. And that we've got to use the temporary stuff to serve the eternal. We can't love things and use people. We got to use things and love people. We understood. Our eyes were opened. And that's what I'm trying to do here today. So you come to church, and you know what? You got families to raise, and you got bills to pay, and you got activities, and you got all kinds of stuff. I just think that God wants to carve into your world the reality that it all goes back into the box. So how are you using your time today? How are you using your resources today? How do you live your life today? And here at this church, we want to give you an opportunity to help expand what might be a little bit of an egocentric existence. And you might not have even intended for it to be. Maybe the guy in the parable, he never made the conscious decision to live his life self-centered. Maybe he just went with the flow. Well, I just want to interrupt that flow in your life and challenge you to broaden, to open up your heart, to use the things God's blessed you with, your talents, your time, your resources, to make a difference in the big picture. And today you can do that. Today is Serving Sunday here at Shoreline. And I think you're going to thank me when that day, that final day on the calendar comes in your life. And you have made the adjustments today to open up your life to embrace a larger existence than just what you do for yourself. You're really going to thank me on that day, I promise you, because when you get to heaven, you're going to understand that all of this stuff, the rust and the moth, Jesus knew it. He said it all just gets destroyed in eternity. It just doesn't matter. But what goes on forever are the people you touch. And maybe for some of you, it's as simple as saying, you know what? I'm going to set my alarm an hour earlier, and I'm going to come to church on Sunday an hour earlier so I can shake hands with some people who are going to last for eternity. I'm going to nurture some children who are going to last for eternity. I'm going to be a part of a band and a choir that's going to sing songs that will bless people for all of eternity. I'm just going to do something today that's going to shift my focus a little bit from it all being about me and my family and my dreams and my aspirations and my goals, because I don't think that we consciously choose that. I think we just kind of drift, and sometimes we've got to fight against that tendency, and you can do that today by saying, I'm just going to sign up, and I'm going to use what God has given to me. Maybe even my resources, my time, my talent, my treasures, what's temporary. And I'm going to use it to serve what is eternal. Could I hear a good amen? So we're going to close. We're going to close this morning in a prayer. And then after we're done this morning, I just want to encourage you guys out in the lobby today. There are people who are wearing shirts. I'm wearing a shirt that's emphasizing small group ministries. That's a way you can get plugged in and serve. But there's all kinds of folks here in our church that are already serving, already saying, you know what, I want my life to count for eternity. And they just want to help you move in that direction in your life. And they'll be available out in the lobby after service today. And we've kind of organized our service today to end just a little bit early, just a few minutes early, to give you that time so you can spend out in the lobby. Not so you can beat the Baptist Diluvies, so you can just kind of hang for a few minutes and see where you can roll up your sleeves and make a difference in the lives of others. So, Father, we just thank you so much for the truth of your word. Jesus, you gave us that parable. You who died on the cross for us, who loves us without conditions, who forgives us completely and utterly, who gave us a brand new identity, who lives on the inside of us. You gave us this parable to remind us that even though the calendar seems to go on forever and we can be deluded into thinking that it just goes on and on and on and on, but at some point in time in our lives, the calendar will end for all of us. And Father, what we've done for eternity will last. What we've done, for the temporal will be, just left behind. It all goes back into the box. Father, help us to carve out of our lives the way you would want us to live so that we reflect the values that you want us to reflect. And Father, I just pray that you would guide each and every person today by your wisdom and by your grace to see where they can make a difference for you. In Jesus' name.